Coming to you from the shores of gorgeous Lake Michigan, this is home to passionate book lovers. Hosting more than 270 acclaimed authors in 14 years, including best-selling novelists Geraldine Brooks, Ann Patchett, and Mitch Albom. We are live at the historic City Opera House in downtown Traverse City, Michigan. Welcome to the National Writers Series. Tonight, a conversation with best-selling author Peter Heller and his new novel, Burn, with guest host Doug Stanton, also a New York Times best-selling author and NWS co-founder. The National Writers Series couldn't do this without our amazing audience, dedicated volunteers, and talented authors.
I love NWS!
We are also raising writers with Battle of the Books and free writing classes to 3rd through 12th grade students across the region.
Thank you, NWS!
Tonight's event is presented to you by Pam and Harold Lassers, Wind Dancer Traverse City Tours, Discovery Cruises, and the Northern Angler. A special thanks to our media partners, Interlochen Public Radio and the Traverse City Record Eagle. We'd also like to thank our sustaining sponsors, the Green Brick Foundation, Northgard Technology, Northwest Michigan Arts and Culture Network, West Shore Bank, Traverse City Tourism, and Cherry Capital Airport. And now, NWS co-founder and executive director Ann Stanton will introduce tonight's event with our board president, Clark Bunting, a former Discovery Channel executive.
Good evening, folks. It's great to see you here at the National Writer Series. The Writer Series brings our most renowned authors and storytellers to the City Opera House. Tonight, we're excited to host Peter Heller, along with guest host Doug Stanton. Peter is here to talk about his new book, Burn. It's a tale about the test of a long friendship and the flames of political divisiveness. As one reviewer wrote, and I quote, "You will fly through the pages, but the story will linger with you for a very long time," end quote. And one last note from me, please don't forget to pick up your copy of Burn as you're leaving tonight.
So that's true what the reviewer says. I was in a Zoom meeting with the staff last week, and we all were talking about the book, and we all read it in 2 days. So it's that gripping. So before we bring Peter and Doug on stage, I'd like to take a moment to express my gratitude. Tonight's event is taking place on lands cherished for generations by the indigenous people of the area. We wish to recognize the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians who reside here today. Thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce you to Doug Stanton, the #1 New York Times best-selling author of In Harm's Way, 12 Strong, and The Odyssey of Echo Company. He's also a co-founder of the National Writers Series with Ann and Grant Parsons.
So a little bit about Peter Heller. This is the 3rd time he's been here at the City Opera House stage, which he says is his favorite venue, and that's pretty cool. He is here with his wife, Kim, and they are having a little vacation time here in Traverse City. They went on a fishing trip on the Manistee River this morning. They're taking a Discovery cruise tomorrow afternoon. Diana Mylock hosted him for dinner the other night. It was a lot of fun. So, as you know, he's here to talk about Burn, which is kind of a cautionary tale of be careful what you wish for. He is the national best-selling author of The Dog Stars, The Painter, The Ranger, and Celine. So, are you ready, guys? Please welcome Doug Stanton and Peter Heller.
Welcome, everyone, and welcome Peter Heller to the National Writers Series stage. So great to have you back.
It is so great to be here, truly.
We fished this morning. Peter caught more than everyone else. We want to thank Brian Pitzer and everyone at Northern Angler for that privilege to being out on the Manistee River. Tell us what Burn is about, your new novel, which I think everyone here is somewhat familiar with, but what's going on in this book?
Okay, so it's two guys. They've been lifelong friends since kindergarten. They live a mile apart. They grew up a mile apart on a dirt road in southern Vermont. They spent a lot of time with each other's families, helping get the wood in, sugar. They went all the way through high school together, had crushes on the same girls, were on the same soccer team, and they're really like brothers. And they went to different colleges, and then one moved out to Denver to become a woodworker, and the other teaches design up at UVM in Burlington, Vermont. And they meet, they're in their mid-30s now, and ever since they've been in their early 20s, they meet to go fishing or hunting every fall. And this year they're up in north central Maine. They both pulled moose tags, which is really tough to do. And they've been out 5 days. They moved their camp, and they're going down a gravel road, and they come to a bridge, and it's been blown. And they need gas, and so they backtrack to a little four-corner village, and it's been burned to the ground, and they soon come to realize that Maine has seceded from the Union while they've been gone. Whoops.
Do we know why Maine seceded from the Union? What happened?
Yeah, I think I probably...
maybe not a spoiler,
maybe I won't go into that, but why does Maine do anything? That's what we sort of... I mean, they don't say much, but they act a little odd sometimes. That's what I find. My mom married a seventh-generation North Haven Mainer, and Pete never said a thing, but you always knew he was really behind everything. He was super smart.
Is it a book about Civil War?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you'll have to read the book to figure out why this happens, I would imagine, right?
Right.
But it's a really beautiful book. You write so well about landscape, and then this trauma set against that landscape is a really interesting blend. Let's talk about your mom for just a moment, and your dad. You grew up, people may not know this, but in Brooklyn Heights.
Right.
Yeah, near the Brooklyn Bridge?
Yep.
Wow, and went to Putney School in Vermont.
Yep.
And tell us about what your dad did for a living and how maybe he influenced you.
So my dad was a writer. I mean, all he wanted to do was write when he was coming up, and he had to get a job like all of us, and he got a job. He was brilliant. He was the most witty guy I ever knew, and wordsmith. And so he got a job on Madison Avenue, and he was a madman. Remember that show? I mean, he dressed in those suits, and he went out to 3 martini lunches, and he'd get a campaign to have an ad campaign for Seagram 7 or Timex, and he'd have a week, and he'd get the whole thing in the first morning in the shower in like 2 minutes. And then he'd have to spend the whole rest of the week making up dumb campaigns to present to the client to show that they did the work, and then of course the final one was the one he'd come up with. And but he was such a writer, and he loved literature, and he would read to me every night when I was a tiny kid. He was reading E.E. Cummings to me when I was like 6, which I said last night was like grounds for social services, because it's pretty bawdy. I didn't understand it, thank goodness, when I was a kid. But I love the music and the language, and Dad did too. And so I think I learned my love of language from him.
And your mom, Carolyn or Caroline?
Yeah, Carol, yeah.
Yeah, what did she do?
So my mom was interesting. Her parents were Americans in Paris in the 1939, 40. 41, and my grandfather was a partner in Morgan's Bank, and he was the youngest one, and he was in charge of the office. And so when the Germans came in, he was the last guy in the office and took a satchel full of the papers and went south out of town. the roads were choked, and so he traded his Aston Martin for a bicycle to some startled Frenchman who said, "Okay, sure, bien sûr, I'll take that car." And he bikes out of Paris. But my mom and her 2 sisters were sent, weeks before to Spain and across. And Mom arrived in New York City not speaking any English, and she would go around at age 7 listening to conversations, trying to decide who was a Nazi spy. And she wanted to go back to France right away at age 7 and fight in the French resistance. I mean, she was quite a lady. And so she grew up wanting to be James Bond, I think. And when we all got old enough that she didn't have to worry about us too much, she got her private investigator's license, and she was a combat pistol shooter, and she knew she could drive, and she was a crack investigator, and she became a seriously fine crack investigator.
And you write about her in your novel, Celine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
If you haven't picked that up, it's really a fascinating book. I think you said you wrote it to be next to your mom or be with her, right? Was this after she passed away?
Yeah, so my mom passed away, and she was an artist, too. She was really interesting. She would make art out of bones and make voodoo altars that were really I thought they were kind of scary. And she lived beneath the Brooklyn Bridge, and a window washer was so enchanted with her work one day, he came back the next day with a human skull in a bucket. Because there were a lot of skulls in her, and he said, "Mrs. Hella, don't ask." So she didn't. She covered it with gold leaf right away, and it remained on a pedestal by the front door for 30 years. But when she died, I got to tell this story. This is crazy. When she died, so my sister Leslie, Kim, my wife, is here. She's like, "We're not having any. You're not putting that on your desk like Hamlet. There's no way." But my sister Leslie took it. There was another human skull that someone had given her in Haiti. And it was this crazy piece of art, and we didn't know what to do with that. So we walked out to the edge of the Brooklyn Bridge. We had it in a Shake Shack bag, and we pretended we were tourists. And there was a Swedish woman with her little daughter looking at the skyline and everything. They were going, and when they weren't looking, and there were cameras everywhere, we took the skull, we threw it into the East River, and it turned up, it floated, and it turned up, and these eyes were looking up at us. She had put eyes in them. And I knew there were cameras. I mean, this is like a total felony. I mean, I might not be able to be here. But, and then the thing just kind of floated, and then it just gradually sunk into the murk, those eyes, and bubbles came up and everything. It was like, it's crazy.
It sounds like a very creative household, a very fun place to grow up. Right?
Oh, yeah. It was fun.
When you were 11, your librarian, your school librarian, introduced you to Hemingway.
Yeah.
And that set you on. How did that change you?
Yeah, that was cool. So I was walking around my little library. I hate to repeat myself if you guys have heard this story, but it's one of my favorites. I was 11, and I had a crush on Annie Bosworth, the librarian. She was English, and I would have married her for the way she said my name. She said, "Peter, are you looking for something to read?" And I was like, "Uh-huh." Thud. And she took me over to the fiction shelf, and she pulled off In Our Time by Ernest Hemingway. And it's mostly up in Michigan. They're mostly Nick Adams stories. And you got to picture an 11-year-old kid who just wanted to be in I didn't want to be in the city. I loved the outdoors already. And I cracked it open, and I just wanted to do that. I wanted to camp by the Big Two-Hearted River and have coffee on an open fire and fish for those trout. But mostly what I wanted was to write with the power that I was feeling. It was the first time I'd ever felt in prose where the writing came through my skin straight to my heart and sort of bypassed the head. And it really blew my mind. It was just a very powerful experience. And I think you probably wouldn't be here because unless you were readers, and I know that you've all had that experience, and it's kind of mind-blowing. And so it set me on this path of wanting to dive into the discipline being a writer. I wanted to treat it like an Olympic sport and do everything I could possibly do to become a fine writer.
It's interesting, and you certainly have provided so many of us with great language and great stories, but your path to this end was very circuitous, right? You became first a poet at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, and then you became a nonfiction writer. Talk about that for a moment. How did being a nonfiction writer change or inform your eventual novel writing?
Right. Well, so I wanted to be, I was a poet, and I just felt like poetry was something you just did. I never sent my poems out or anything. It was just a love, a labor of love. I just loved it. But I really wanted to be a fiction writer and get published and all that.
Even back in graduate school?
Back when I was, 11. But, I had to make a living. And so, I started writing for magazines. I started a career in journalism, and I was a kayaker, I kayaked a lot of crazy stuff in it, and so I had a niche, it used to be if you wanted to get published in magazines, you would have a niche. If you really knew about quarter horses or whatever, you could probably get published in Quarter Horse Quarterly. Is there such a thing? Probably. And then move on to, after you cut your teeth on, in the niche magazines, you could move on to bigger stuff. That was always the advice the older writers would give. So I had kayaking, and I started writing for Outside magazine because I had that, and that led to all sorts of more and more environmental stories, because as I traveled, I could see that the world was unraveling. And I never thought of it as a waste of time. It was a detour, but it was great training, because if you think about a magazine article, it's usually lying at the dentist's office on the table, or it's in the kitchen, just on the counter, and you flip through it, and you have to grab the reader. I mean, it's so easy just to toss a magazine aside and do something else or read another one. And so I found that if I could establish a sense of place that transported the reader right away, that they felt like they were in it, and if I could do that with all my senses, use as many senses as possible, that was sort of how I did it. And I found that if I could make the characters jump off the page like living people, that people would probably turn the page and go on to the next. And it taught me about pacing, too, of story. It was great training. And also to sort of catalog small details as you went through.
Did you take notes with a notebook? And
I did.
Did you record any interviews or just listen?
No, I wrote. So I met John McPhee, the great nonfiction writer, at a wedding once. And I was so starstruck. I was 26. I knew what I wanted to do. And I took my plate and I sat in the grass next to him, and I blinked. And I introduced myself, and I asked him, I said, hey, your dialogue is so authentic. It just feels, the characters feel so real. Do you, when you're hiking and talking to, the guy who founded the Sierra Club on some mountain, are you taking notes as you go? Or do you remember it back in camp by the campfire and write it down? He said, oh, no. If I tried to remember it and write it down, it would all sound like me. Every voice is, every bit of speech has a fingerprint. And so he would write down every sneeze, every every and it taught me to do that. And so when I was, for instance, covering Sea Shepherd in the Southern Ocean, in 40-foot seas
Tell us just briefly what was going on then. You were on a ship that was attacking whalers.
Yeah, so this was an eco-pirate ship, all black. It flew under a Jolly Roger, and it was menacing. And I found myself on this assignment. I thought it was going to be a lark, and then it turns out everyone on the ship was ready to die to save a whale. I was like, oh, this. And I brought a lot of fishing gear because I thought we're going 9 knots in some of the best fishery in the world, and I thought the trolling would be good. And then somebody showed me, when they showed me my berth, they said, oh, by the way, this is a vegan ship. And I was like, oh, I'll just put this. I think I'll hide all the fishing gear. But anyway, these guys were fierce. You know, they would ram the Japanese whaling ships.
They had a bow, something on the bow of the ship.
Yeah, 3 days south of Tasmania, out in the open ocean, where there was no law, all the welders came out on deck and they welded a huge blade to the starboard bow called the can opener, and it was to gut the hulls of the ships. And that's sort of when I knew that this was really serious. And you know, there was no Zodiac off. We were committed. But I was very moved by the commitment of these people. And anyway, we get into these really rough seas, huge. And so the bridge is up like 30 feet, and we come over a wave, and we come down, and there was ice in the water too, and then green water would go over the bow and up over the bridge for a couple of seconds. So you're like submarine. And I would wedge myself between the radar table and the bulkhead where the window was and write everything everybody said. And I came back with probably 10 notebooks full of scribble I couldn't read. But the act of writing it impressed, you know how it is when you write something down, it impressed myself, it impressed in my brain, and it was better than recording, you know, it was really cool.
You said something earlier, you said when you knew that the world was unraveling. What did you mean by that?
Well, as I traveled on more and more adventure stories, you know, I went around the world to run rivers, and it was very apparent that, you know, the ecosphere was unraveling, especially doing stories about the oceans. You know, I'd go snorkeling, and I'd be in an area that I'd been 10 years before, and now the reefs were all bleached or dead, and it was very sad. It occurred to me that you can't just write about adventure anymore, that, you know, I had to take some responsibility and write about the environment.
It seems that some of this sentiment is part of the novel Burn. Right, that the sense that maybe, I mean, literally in this novel, kind of everything has kind of fallen apart, right? And am I correct in kind of sensing that the sense it's unraveling, it's a novel about unraveling?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I start with I don't plot or plan or outline, because when I finally got to write fiction. I mean, I had to make a living, and so for years and years I wrote for magazines, and I wrote, and books came out of those articles. So when I finally got a chance to sit down and write the novel I'd always wanted to write, I was writing for Business Week. I'd followed an editor all the way through, and he called me up through, you know, he's at Outside and Men's Journal, and he called me up and he said, hey, do you want to write for Business Week? And I said, no. And he said, why not? And I said, because, dude, it's Business Week. And it's like, he said, you can write about anything you want as long as you can put a pie graph in there. And you can put a pie graph in anything. So I had a great time writing for him, but I finally thought, you know, I have 9 months where I can sit down and not take an assignment, and it's time. I want to write this novel now. And that was The Dog Stars. But I didn't want to know.
Yay for The Dog Stars, yes.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I didn't want to know what was going to happen. I didn't want to outline, because every story I'd written, I knew what was going to happen next.
Yep.
And I knew what the ending was going to be. And so I just sat down. I wrote, I keep the beast running. I keep the 100 low lead on tap. I foresee attacks. A few lines later, my name is Hig, one name. Big Hig if you need another. If I ever woke up crying in the middle of a dream, and I'm not saying I did, it's because the trout are gone, every one. And I just sat up and I thought, okay, I'm listening. Speak. And then it was as if this guy was telling me what had happened to him a few years before, you know, sitting on the other side of a campfire.
Where were you, Peter, when this happened?
This was in my coffee shop and in Denver. And I'd be writing along, you know, and because I don't plot, I never knew what was going to happen. And so something would happen, And I'd have tears just dripping off my chin onto the table. I would just be crying for something. And I know people in the coffee shop were just thinking, that poor son of a bitch, man, he's going through a bad divorce. Or, his dog must have died this morning or something. But really what was happening was I was more thrilled than I'd ever been in my life. I was like completely transported. And it was like I was living this other parallel existence. And
Where do you think that story came from?
I think, it was interesting. I had a friend there in town, and I'd meet with him for breakfast every couple of weeks. And he was a paleobotanist, one of the great paleobotanists. And so what he did was he studied plant communities, fossils, before the asteroid hit and after the asteroid hit. And so he was like an aficionado of extinction. And we'd be in Kyle's Kitchen, the cafe up the street, and we'd be talking about what would happen when this sixth great mass extinction that we're in right now started really impacting human society. And for some reason, those discussions weren't depressing. They were kind of really exciting and interesting. And I'd say, this, the collapse of the world. What about Kyle? What about the swallows? What about me and you? And he'd go, dude, you're so high maintenance. Relax. He had the long view, right? He'd say, the Earth shrugged off, 90% of its biota, 66 million years ago, and look at it now, so just relax. And I think those discussions, were right before I sat down to write The Dog Stars, and I think that was on my mind.
Wow. This idea of surprise and discovery, I find it very fascinating, that you're able to sit down. Do you have any sense of what you plug into? Or do you ever understand what the influences might have been for that day's work? Take Burn, for instance. I mean, what was going on the week before you wrote Burn? Or do you remember that moment of that spark of creativity that led you to the first line? Because you start with a line and you keep going.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't ever feel like there's a cause. I feel like that the language. So I have to be infatuated with the music of the language, or enthrall with a cadence and some images and a feeling like almost like an ambience. It's not even tone. There's something deeper. I have to be enthralled to that.
How do you get there? What's the process?
I drink a ton of coffee.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, but no, I drink 2 cups of French roast at home, and then I go to the coffee shop and I have a latte with 2 shots. And I put on headphones that play Oregon Rain. And I think it might be some guy with a hose on a piece of tin roof. I don't know. The app says it's rain. It sounds good. But there's this thing about just hearing music, and then, so the first line of Burn, I think it's, he let the fire burn down to embers, let the dark envelop him, and stood. And it immediately sort of captivated me because I like the rhythm of the line. And then I thought, and it's dark, that's kind of cool. Mm-hmm. And I thought, this guy stands as he's ready for something. What is it? And I went into the second line and the third, and it was fun.
It's this process of discovery. What's the influence of poetry that's had on this moment that you've just described? What poets do you like or have been important to you?
Poetry's been huge because that's what I really read mostly when I was coming up, and I read everybody. I read Emily Dickinson. I loved Wallace Stevens, just the lushness of the language. I love T.S. Eliot. I think the Four Quartets is one of the great works of art of all time, and that's because of the music of the language. I was particularly struck by later in my life. I started reading the ancient Chinese poets, the Tang Dynasty poets, which I've talked about with some of you. These guys were sort of like the original bluesmen. They were writing in the 8th and 9th century in China. And they're so simple, and they're usually in nature, these poems. And these guys in like 5 or 7, 8 lines can place you like knee deep in a mountain creek with the mist shredding in the pines and maybe a temple bell echoing across, and then break your heart.
Do you have one committed to memory?
Sure. So Li Shang Yin, this is one of my favorites, and it's the last poem, a page of the Dog Stars, and it goes, "When will I be home? I don't know. In the mountains, in the rainy night, the autumn lake is flooded. One day, we will be back together again. We will sit in the candlelight by the west window, and I will tell you how I remembered you tonight on the stormy mountain." So beautiful.
It is, and it's interesting because, yes, that comes to us, what, from the 8th or 9th century?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
9th century, yeah.
When you write like that, when you write that lyric, it's interesting then you're now a novelist and you have to make things happen on the page.
Right.
How do you navigate that that issue? Was it an issue when you started out? Like, now I have to make something happen. He has to leave the room.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's so interesting because I don't really know. I mean, that's the strange part of it. Like, so I think of it sort of like, well, okay, when I sat down to write The Dogs, it's my first novel, I would show up every morning at the table in the coffee shop, and I'd tell myself, don't think, just listen. And as I said, then and then Hig would start speaking. And I wrote that book in like 7 months in a white heat, you know, and that poem is the last page of the book. Hig is lying under the stars. He's making up new constellations, one because he doesn't remember the old ones, the real ones, and makes one for his dog Jasper, the fish-eating dog, and another for his wife, and then he says, you know, and my favorite poem was written by Li Shang Yin in the 9th century, and that poem was the last page. And, you know, the novel sold, and I thought, I don't want second novel syndrome. I'd heard about that, sophomore effort, where, you know, a book you write, your debut, sort of makes some clamor, good or bad, and you sort of freeze up. There's a lot of pressure. So I thought, I have 9 months before this novel probably comes out, after it was submitted. So I'm going to try and write the next one as fast as I can. So I started writing The Painter, and I started writing, and this is not a spoiler if you haven't read it because it's right in the beginning, but my character, who's a painter, kills a guy with a rock because the guy, he was beating a horse, and our hero saves the horse, and then he eventually kills this guy. And I started thinking, should the guy he kills have a brother bent on vengeance? So I called my editor, Jenny Jackson, at Knopf in New York, and I said, Jenny, should he have a brother? And she said, yeah, of course. So I wrote The Brother. And then I was thinking, well, he has a commission to go paint these twins in Santa Fe. When should he go? And then I was thinking, and when he does go, should the brother chase him and try and kill him? And then I was thinking, I'm thinking about it. And I didn't think about the last one so much. So this can't be good. So I was in the little coffee shop in Paonia, Colorado, where the painter takes place, and I was in the very little coffee shop where Jim, my painter, meets his model, who becomes his lover. It's a small space, very small, like as big as this stage here, and there's one table in there, and you're going to meet anyone who's in there. And guess who was in there? Paolo Bacigalupi, the great science fiction writer. This guy is amazing. He's won Hugo Awards, Andromeda Awards, blockbuster bestseller. And we'd started talking the way writers talk, and I was telling him about my challenge, and he said, picked up his coffee cup, and he said, sit down, son. He's a lot younger than me, too. It took a lot of brass, I thought. Sit down, son. I'm going to tell you a story. I wrote 2 short stories. One, complete fugue state. That's what it felt like. I kind of woke up.
What's a fugue state for?
It's like you're in this flow, you're sort of half asleep. He wrote the story. And he sent it in, and it won a big award. And he said, I love it. Second story, I plotted every second of the story. I designed, engineered the characters to interact a certain way in every scene. Total authorial control. I sent it in, it won a big award, and I love it. And now when I hold them both up, I can't tell the difference. I love them both. And then he leaned forward and he said, your job is just to make sure it doesn't suck. And the whole creative burden just like lifted off my shoulders. It was like, oh, I think I could probably handle that, But what he was saying that was so marvelous was, look, rely on your craft. You've written 100 stories, half of them you've thrown out. Tighten up the slow stuff, throw out the bad stuff, rearrange it if you need to. Just make sure it's not terrible. And the second thing he said I think was so wonderful was every story can have a different method. You can bootstrap it, pants it, they call it, go, or you can outline, you can do a combination of each. Don't worry about it. And I thought that's like the best advice any writer's ever given me.
This is during the composition of The Painter, your second novel. Oh, wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah, so I stopped worrying, like if I, and the other metaphor I think about, I sort of think about, putting on, because I had such a, rivers were such a big part of my life. I always thought of writing as like putting this little boat of a novel on a narrative current and going into new territory that, undiscovered as of yet. But another metaphor that kind of works is riding a mountain horse that knows the country way better than you, and maybe an outfitting horse. And you give Dandy the reins, and he goes. But his brain is the size of a walnut. And he's a horse. And every once in a while, he just wants to go down in that gully for some reason. He smells something. You know how it is when you're riding a horse. And so you just rein him in, nudge him over a little bit and say, let's go this way. And then you give him the reins again. And so, that's sort of how, for me, that's how the process goes. It's not like sticking to plot points or anything like that. It's just like, hey, maybe let's go this direction, then we'll follow our nose again.
Do you have a sense of what you were following when you wrote Burn? Like, were you following, tell us who Jess and Storey are and what is the journey that they're on?
Well, they both have certain challenges. Jess, for instance, I guess the camera, so it's third person, right? So it's not first person, but the camera is closest to Jess's shoulder, I think. And he has it tough. His dog just died, and his wife left him flat, and he's like a walking country song. And Storey, he has 2 daughters, young daughters, and the oldest is 13, and she has an eating disorder. She almost died of anorexia, and she's a star cross-country runner. And it's exacerbated, the disorder is exacerbated by stress, of course. And so, when the bridge gets cut off, when they start to realize they're in a civil conflict, poor Storey, he's just beside himself because he's thinking about what his family's going through and what his daughter must be going through, wondering where they can't, they're out of reach in a civil conflict. So he's really, really worried. And so, and the 2 guys, they're so close, but they also have big secrets that they've held from each other, and those begin to come out too. And that was so interesting to write because they surprised me.
Do you read the news, Peter? Does the news influence, especially with this book, which is about civil unrest and polarization, how much did that perhaps influence your thinking when you sat down?
Yeah, for sure. I think when you use this method where you just sort of, start with the first line and go, you're gonna, for me anyway, like I bump into whatever's really on my heart or what's really concerning me within a few pages or a chapter. And, for Celine, it was interesting because Celine, which is about my mom, it started out with the story of a young woman who, it was this whole story of this young woman who had lost her father. He had been killed by a bear in Yellowstone, but she thought maybe that wasn't true. And so she seeks out a private investigator. And within a few pages, she was calling my mom, the PI. And what I realized was my mom had died like 9 months before. And what I realized was I just missed her so terribly that I wanted to hang out with her for another year. And what was so crazy about that was that as I was writing the book, I learned so much about my mother. Like I discovered so many things, which is that's sort of the magic of writing fiction for me.
You mean about literal facts or just a sense of empathy and awareness of her?
I discovered a lot about why my mother had made certain decisions in her life that affected me very strongly. That's wild, right? I mean, that's...
Do you want to talk about what one of those was? Or
oh, heck no. We're not going there tonight. No way.
That's for the
Dr. Ruth is like, no, we're not doing that.
That's for the next book.
But Burns, so anyway, you bump into what's on your heart. And I think, I think the fracturing that's going on in our country, I think it's heartbreaking. I think this country's full of like huge-hearted people that are the best people on the planet. We're so kind. And how can we lose our kind?
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, we cannot lose our kindness to each other and that looking out for each other, no matter what we believe. Oh my God, who cares?
And then there was silence. So there is news. Do you do research? Like, you've had friends who are a knife-fighting friend. I mean, what kind of research? You did so much for your nonfiction books.
Right.
What's it like to do the novels?
Well, it's really freeing because, it's my party and, I make it all up. And I don't really have to do any research, but there's no journalist. Okay, so this is really fun. So the Dog Stars, I finished the Dog Stars, and in the Dog Stars, there's two guys living at a country airport. One guy, Hig, with his old dog, and 99.7% of people have been wiped out by this pandemic.
This is in 2012.
Right, when I wrote that, yeah.
Yeah, so this is not recent, no.
No. So being a journalist, and I really am assiduous about getting things right, and I like to get things right. I'm being a little flip about I can make it up because I think it's really important to have things feel authentic for your reader. And so I really, really like to get it right. And so being a good journalist, I called, a friend of mine's sister was the chief epidemiologist for New York City in 2012. So she would have been the one to lock down Queens or whatever, if there was some pandemic. And I called her up and I said, Lorna, do you know of any, is there any flu that could wipe out 99.7% of people? And she was so sweet. I mean, she knew that I'd spent 7 months writing this book. So there was a considered pause. And then she said, nah, I don't think so. And she said, the bird flu, what was the flu?
Avian bird flu,
bird flu, like wiped out so many people in like 1917 because all the soldiers came back, whatever that was, can't remember. Yeah. Because so many soldiers came back and it spread, but the mortality rate was like 15%. It was, So I thanked her, and then being a good journalist, I just called another source. And I called my buddy who's deputy chief counsel for Livermore National Labs, which is a weapons lab, top secret. And this guy has like Q clearance and top secret clearance, all that. He doesn't even tell me like when he leaves work. But I called him up and I said, hey, Mark, do you think there'd be like a bird flu, a flu that could wipe out 99.7% of people? He didn't even hesitate. He said, yeah, man, you mean like a weaponized bird flu? Of course. And then all the hair on the back of my neck went up because I knew they had it in the fridge, in like a little, it's like, but.
Wow. That fact checking, though, is how do you fact check your emotions? Like, I mean, I guess it goes to the sense of revision.
Right.
You can revise a fact, but when you're skiing down this mountain of the narrative, how do you back out, or how do you know you've made the wrong decision? I mean, I think this discussion of creativity is so fascinating because we can actually transport it to other parts of our lives.
Sure.
What you're really saying is, I think, trust the process, no matter what it is.
Right.
Yeah, but how do you revise? How do you revise?
Well, that's a really good question, and so I read chunks of the book out loud to my wife. My wife Kim is here tonight, and
Hi, Kim. Welcome.
hi Kim, and she's my first reader, and she has an impeccable sense of where it's soft, where it's slack, where motivation isn't working, and I read chunks of the book out loud as I'm going, and then she'll be sitting on the end of the couch, and I'll be reading along, and she'll start nodding off, and she'll go, "Too much fishing," and then fall asleep. And and she's always right. That's the thing. And so I cut it in half. And it's really, really important, I think, for at least, I mean, I think for fiction writers, for all writers, to have a community of readers that you really trust. Mm-hmm. And they can really, because a lot of times the forest from the trees sort of thing happens, and they really, with that perspective that you can't have because you're so close, can oftentimes tell where something, an emotion isn't quite right, or it's, you're leaning too hard on it or whatever, and it's very, very valuable. And it goes to Kim first, and it goes to my friend Lisa, and then it goes to my agent, and then it goes to my editor, and by the time it gets to my editor, she still has stuff to say, but probably not as much as she would have had, yeah.
Nature is so important in all of your work. Perhaps there's too much fishing sometimes, but it's really an important act. And I just want to talk a moment about, especially in Burn, the role that nature is providing these young men and these people in this book. How is it helping them, or how is it moving them down the road? What's our relationship to nature nowadays, given the fact that you think it's unraveling, or you sense that it is?
Well, there's, I can't write without being connected to, I don't seem to be able to write fiction without being connected to nature. And I think it's because I'm sitting in a coffee shop in Denver, Colorado, and I can go anywhere I want because, it's my show. And so I always end up going to some place that I love, that I really want to be. And, that's always some place sort of wild and sort of remote, and someplace, with weather and mountains usually, and rivers. And I find a lot of power there, and a lot of connection, a lot of energy.
What do you feel connected to, or what is that power?
I don't know, because you get into, then you're bordering on almost a religious discussion. It's for me, and that's, I think, why I love to fish so much, because when I'm fishing, there's so much focus and so much attention to the smallest things. And the oddest thing about it, and you know this because you fish for the same reasons, I know you do, that attention to all the little things somehow expands. It's a strange sort of dynamic, but it somehow expands your awareness. It does my awareness of the river, of the valley, or the canyon, of the sky, of the whole world. And I end up feeling more connected than I ever do anyplace else. And I feel small. I feel part of something that's so much greater and so much more powerful than I am. And I think, that's what religion is about. And that humility is so, it's so powerful, and it's so wonderful and so beautiful. And I think when I'm writing along, why wouldn't I submit to that, or why wouldn't I immerse myself in that? And my characters, they're always under pressure. They're always having a tough time. And I think somehow that they're in that beauty at the same time. Somehow that juxtaposition gives me I feel like there's a lot of power there, and that's just what happens.
A couple of things. Having read the Guide, The River, The Last Ranger, Burn, Dog Stars, it seems that you often set people into a world that is populated either by danger or evil, so to speak, or some type of calamity, and then these people are meant to face that challenge, and by doing so, they actually apprehend a greater spiritual, philosophical sense of themselves by kind of coming up the brute force of nature itself. You remember the essay by Thoreau about him climbing Katahdin in 1846, the end of that essay?
I didn't read that essay.
I have it, I'll give it to you, but
okay.
It ends in the most hair-raising way. He's climbing the second highest mountain in New England, Penobscot, and he's going up and up and up, and he starts to just unravel. The language starts to unravel on the page. It's filled with hyphens and dashes, and the whole essay ends with contact.
I love that. He's so great.
He goes, who am I?
Yeah.
Where am I?
Yeah.
Contact.
It's so great.
And he's hitting the grimy, the red tooth of nature.
Yeah. That's interesting, because I wrote this memoir about surfing, and I surfed this big wave, and then at the end of the book, and I think the last lines, it's sort of the same. It just trails off. It's just like, thank you, and then I got hit in the head, and my skull cracked open and everything.
Really?
Right at the very end of that. Yeah.
Oh, that book's called Kook.
Yeah.
And you're 10 months of surfing down the coast of California trying to learn how to
Right,
surf.
but it was that same sort of that same sort of just awe and unraveling at the end of the language. It's fun, yeah. I want to read that, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, awe and surrender seem to be things that kind of woven through your work.
Right.
And the fulcrum of that is control. You tip one way or another, surrender or control. Well, actually, surrender and control, and then you're an awe-inspiring author.
Oh, gosh, that's cool. Coming from this man. Thank you.
Before we go to questions in just a moment, you were talking about, quote, God, and I know you had a teacher who asked you a very important question, or told you what art could do. Every time you create a work of art, what happens? Yeah,
so I went to the writer's workshop, and I was late when I went. I was like 32 when I went to this writer's workshop, and there was a poet there named Jory Graham, who's just a fantastic poet. And we were in her seminar, and it was so funny. I took the fiction workshop and poetry workshop at the same time, and all the poets wore all black. And they had little, like, wire-rim Yeatsian glasses. And they were very intellectual and academic, and they talked about negative capability and stuff. And the fiction writers were all like us, and they had families, and they just wanted to tell a good story. And it was so interesting being in these two different cultures. And I loved them both. But here I was in this seminar with Jory Graham, and we were talking about the inception of a poem. And she said, I think every poem and every work of art begins with a question, and the poem is the answer. And then she said, so don't ask the question of me or your audience or the critics or your editor or the market. Ask it of God. And aim high. And it really struck me, and I thought, that's what we're doing here. Whatever God is for each of us. It was a very powerful.
Thank you. Would you read a section from
Sure.
Burn?
Can you guys take a reading for 4 minutes? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to start at the very beginning, the prologue. It'll save you some time. Prologue. He let the fire burn down to embers, let the dark envelop him, and stood. Jess stepped to the edge of the trees and looked down to the water. It was a big lake, and he could see only the bay and the curve of the wooded shore, and he could see that the water held there was nearly glass. The black mirror floated countless stars, and the stars barely rocked. He lifted his eyes to where they held fast in the depthless sky, and he saw among them a satellite sailing swiftly east to west, and he wondered what it might be witnessing in its silent transit. If he himself could be a night bird like some great horned owl on soundless wings, would he fly north over the next town, over the road beyond it? Randall, that was the name on the map, wasn't it? Would he want to see? Probably not. In the days since they had found the bridge over the river blown and no way south, he had dreamed hard every night. Dreams on dreams with segues like swinging bridges. He had dreamt of their house, his house now, but it stood in the sage of some high western desert, unprotected by a single tree, and the rail fences were broken, the horses vanished. In the dream, they had more than one horse, but he couldn't remember how many or if he had asked a neighbor to care for them while he was gone, because he was gone. That was the gut weight of the dream, his own absence from anything like home. He dreamed the return again and again, a homecoming only as much as an old negative represented the photographed image, a homecoming that was as much a leaving, and she was never in it. He called for her inside a house he no longer recognized, and again in successive nights, he walked around the house to the back, to the clothesline stanchions that gestured like empty crosses, and he found a well, and he called for her there and dared to look down it and received only cold echo. He woke from that dream with the pillow of his rolled jacket wet. He lay in the wash of his own story and let the sound of a faint broken music trail off, and he let himself cry. And almost as soon as he gave himself permission to sleep, he was pulled back into the dark. There was no swimming above it. He dreamt then that he was in a pasture digging, first with a spade, which he laid down so he could scoop back the finely graveled mud with bare hands, to ditch some kind of drain. And when he stood, he saw a former lover walking past the white-clapboard house, her glance back seductive the way any vista is seductive, just passing out of view. But he didn't know her. He should, but he didn't. She had large dark eyes, as Jan had, and his longings was for something familiar, some beauty that rolled in his raw fingers as the prayer stone she had given him rolled now, while he stood with the trees at his back. She called it a prayer stone. It was the size of a radish and taken from their favorite creek and given to him as a reminder to pay attention. Love is attention, she said. That is all you know on earth. He had it in his pocket now. And as he stood at the edge of the woods and watched the drifting stars jostle barely on the water like faint semaphores, and smelled the cold sediment of the lake and the cold char of the town, he squeezed the stone in his right palm and wished he could signal her as the sparked reflections on the water seemed to blink to the throned galaxies arching above. I am here, forever rhyming, forever loyal. Or maybe it was just an unheard music that time and space could never quiet, a music that turned and turned like a horse in the wheeling dark. And with that thought and the warming stone chafing his palm, he thrummed with a grief and love so immense he could not contain it, to stand here, to breathe, to witness. He thought wildly in that moment, they better be enough.
Thank you. That sense of paying attention, sense of paying attention, seems to me somehow to resonate with the idea of what you said earlier about we must be kind, which now as I hear you read that gives me more insight into this novel. That really, while it may be about polarization and a civil war, which is kind of happening off stage in a lot of the book, except there is a lot of action in this book, that really in the end it's about these people trying to knit themselves back together.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Hey, listen, let's bring up the lights and go to some questions. We get to see all of you folks here in the Opera House. Thank you. We're all set. Go ahead, sir. What's your name? Just your first name?
Hi, my name's Chip.
Hi, Chip.
My question is about how you spend your time. So when you're in the middle of writing a book, how much time do you spend reading? Do you watch TV? Do you waste time? So I'm just always in awe of people who are very productive, and I think, I watch too much TV, or I read too many newspapers. So what do you do with your time?
I'm really good at wasting time. I love wasting time. I think that's what we're here for, if we can afford it. I don't know. I mean, my day if you want to know how my day goes, I get up. Sometimes it's like early 6:30. Sometimes, if I sleep in, I'll sleep till 8, and that's pretty late. But I make coffee. I drink 2 big cups of strong French roast, and often I'll have a couple of friends come over and sit on the porch. I love drinking coffee on a porch. And then I go to the coffee shop, and I sit down, and I have a latte, and I work, and I read 1,000 words every day, 6 or 7 days a week. And I never write less, but I never let myself write more. I write just past 1,000 words till I'm in the middle of an exciting scene or something, exciting thought. And then I make myself stop, so I never run on past the quota. And that way I'm always excited to jump out of bed in the morning. And I know I'm not coming back to a transition or white space or anything, which is really, it's a good trick. And so that takes me till 2, usually. And then I come home and I have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a glass of milk. And then I might lie on the couch, and I'm just hammered. I'm just so tired. And I lie there and I think I've wasted my life because I've been lying there for half an hour. And then I make myself get up and I go paddle a kayak around the lake, or I go swimming, or I go to the gym. And I think it's really important to I try and bring the best of myself to those few hours in the morning writing, sort of like maybe an athlete would. And so I know it's important to get outside and to get good exercise, so I do that. And then then we're in the 5, 6 o'clock range, and then it's time to eat dinner. And then I either read or Kim and I will go up to the TV that's way up. I never, when I built my house, I didn't want a TV down in the main room or anything. And so you have to climb several sets of stairs to get up there. You got to earn it. And then, we watch Yellowstone. And I hate Yellowstone. I don't know why I watch it. I can't stand anyone in there. They're all terrible. But I can't stop. That's my day.
Thank you. I think that's a recipe for success. Joelle, please.
So this is a question from our virtual audience. However, from those of us who have already had a chance to read the book, I think inquiring minds want to know, are you going to write a sequel to Burn?
So I never know, because when I close my eyes, I'm in the coffee shop, and I start with that first line. I really never know who's gonna start talking or where they're gonna be. So that would be cool. I think it's a great idea.
Had you thought of it before?
Yeah, no, I have.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm writing another novel now, and it's not a sequel to Burn. But as I was writing it, I thought, wow, man, that would have been cool to write a sequel to Burn. It'd be, yeah.
I'm curious, just what was, just for a moment, I mean, give us the inception moment of the latest novel. Don't tell us what it is, but what happened? Were you shopping? Were you sitting at the coffee shop? Did you go swimming? I mean, what kind of music did you hear that day? Do you know?
The one I'm working on now?
Yeah.
It was a line about a guy he bought the house sight unseen. I just like the way that sounded. He bought the house sight unseen, and that raises a lot of questions. And that's how that one started.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yes, okay. Yeah.
I'm curious, the part where you speak about the liminal spaces and the in-between spaces in the beginning of the book, and he's starting to remember being with Jan. Are you, as a writer, are you getting inside the character and remembering, creating memories as the character, or are you remembering things from your own life as a person and attributing those to the character?
Right. That's such a good question. No, it's the strangest thing. It's just the oddest thing. I am Jess remembering. I'm not me remembering something in the past. I mean, I didn't say love is attention. Jan said it, and Jess remembered Jan saying it, which is so interesting. You know, it's like, I didn't know that, but Jan did, and so Jess did, and so now I do.
Noelle.
I'm Joelle, but that's okay.
Joelle.
It's a joke. Noelle, Joelle, we get it all the time. Okay, another question from the virtual audience. Why did you decide to start Burn with the action right away?
So I always thought plot was silly, and that's why I don't plot. I just think the idea of sitting down and writing a novel and saying this happens and this happens and this happens, it just seems like, so, you know, I never know what's going to happen, but despite myself, in all my novels, a lot of stuff happens. I don't know why. And I like it. I mean, it's exciting. If nothing happened, I'd get so bored. I don't, you know, I don't know why there's action right away, but I'm glad there was. Yeah.
The author, Michael Cordia, you know, he pointed out that perhaps you're writing really a literary thriller, that in some ways it's not genre fiction, but it does adhere to the idea of being a genre with a strong plot. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, listen, when I first sat down to write The Dog Stars, I didn't know if it was even legal to just start with the first line and not know. I didn't know because I didn't know if anyone did it. And so I've told this story before to some of you, but I called my friend Carlton. He was my best friend in high school. His name's Carlton Hughes, and he was the showrunner for Lost, and has a ton of TV shows. Like, he's huge, and he didn't seem that smart in high school, but he really was, and just quiet. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, Carlton, you've worked with so many novelists. Do you know anyone who just starts with the first line and lets it rip?" And he didn't even hesitate. He said, "Oh yeah, man, I work with Stephen King. Stephen King often starts with the first line, has no idea. It's a voice, the voice is a character, the character's in a place. There's a situation because there's always a situation he writes into the story." And then he said something that really sort of surprised me. He said, "I worked with Elmore Leonard, and Elmore Leonard often starts with the first line and has no idea." You know, you think of those tightly plotted, fast-paced crime novels in South Florida, and that just gave me permission. I thought, you know, I'm not the only one. And then I met Lee Child at a strange writers' book festival in Palm Springs at a golf club. It was really weird. But he and I both got up early in the morning to work before the festivities, and we got to talking over coffee, and I said, about process, and I said, "Yeah, I just start with the first line, let it rip." And he said, "Yeah, me too." And I was like, "Yeah, right." You know, like, You? And he said, yeah, man, my method is I just throw everything up in the first half. I throw everything against the wall I can think of that's fun, interesting, menacing, like dead bodies, car accidents, lurking figures. I throw it against the wall. Second half, I just mirror all that. I tie up all the threads. Whatever doesn't tie up is a red herring, and I'm good. And I did what you did. I just burst out laughing. I said, man, I've read whole books on how to write a novel. You just gave me a method in like 2 lines. That's pretty cool. So.
Yes, sir.
Peter, it's an honor to meet you and see you. I'm a big fan of all your work. It's great. I've read just about all of your books except Kook, I think. Is that the surfing one? Is that okay? So, but what amazes me about, like, you have this incredible way of like making things like Manly Man, like the other guy, I can't remember the guy in the Dog Stars, not Hig, but the other guy.
Bangley, yeah.
Bangley, yeah, okay. So, yeah, this guy's like Manly Man. He's got all these guns. I mean, he'll kick your ass, right? I mean, okay. And then you have these like extreme, beautiful, tender moments of like utter beauty on a river. And then like these superior, like these great moments where you go into your psyche, and like the character is crying, and I don't know. It's a vast range of emotions. So I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but
how does you do it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like it's just so amazing. But the part that amazes me is, is like, I don't know, people born in the 70s and before, these kinds of things don't usually happen along with Manly Man things. So I'm just saying thank you for
being a manly man.
For making men cry.
Right. I want to put that quote like up in my website somewhere, like, thank you for making men cry. That's just great.
That's great.
I don't know why, everybody cries. I mean, like, what's the surprise? It's so funny about, I don't know.
Yes, go right ahead. Hi.
Anyway, wait, I just want to say I really appreciate that. It means a lot to me what you just said, so thank you very much.
It's going to make you cry.
Hi. Thanks for coming back. I haven't read any of your nonfiction, but I have a sense that you've been in some very scary, life-threatening. Last night you talked about somebody dying in your arms, and I'm wondering how those experiences inform your fiction. A lot of times when I've been out in the woods with you, and I'm like scared to death. But I think that there's a sense to me that you've been in those situations for real. So if you could talk about that. Thank you.
Well, like I said, I had to make a living, and I was a kayaker, and my first story was a kayak expedition up to the Tibetan plateau and to do a first descent, and a man did die on the first day in my arms, and it was traumatic. I mean, I grieved for a long time. And, I subsequently took assignments, on those kinds of stories, and I got to see people under extreme pressure, and myself also under extreme pressure, and I got to become aware or look at the sort of succession of emotions that like I would go through in those situations, and watch others, and it was really great. I mean, it was great for a fiction writer. It was really kind of awesome. But I also think that just on a more simple, basic level, I think that I end up writing about stuff that has traumatized me, and that in the act of writing, I'm sort of working through it. So the river, for instance, has a mega fire in it, and when I was in Paonia, living in my little cabin, I came out from writing one day and I saw a column of smoke, and I tore down there in my truck, and it was a forest fire threatening my friend's house, and we tried to get everything out, the cats and the paintings, and there was one little fire truck way up this rocky road, and one little volunteer town truck, and like 6 of us trying to shuttle stuff to vehicles. And then the wind gusted, and that smoke that was behind the pinyon juniper turned into a wall of flame. And the fire guys said, we're out of here. They cut their hoses and jumped in the truck, and all of us went down this road, and we were going through smoke, then sparks, then flames, and we got down to the bottom of where this big canal was, and all the police and fire guys were down there. And the fire took the whole slope 90 seconds later, the entire, where we were, everything. And it made a deep impression on me, and I think maybe the fearsome, the ferocity and terror of that fire in the river, I know that it came from that. Just like, and the same day, 12 firefighters were killed on the other side of the mesa in the Storm King. So I think it's a lot about, I think the fiction for me is a lot about working through personal stuff that I've been through, but it's also about sort of like feeling. I think, we were talking about, an unraveling. I think that was so sensitive and incisive, and I think part of the artist's job also is not just the personal, but sort of to feel what's going on and sort of, help us all get our arms around it. I mean, we're going through a tough time right now. There is an unraveling of the ecosphere, and it's hard to handle it. And I think, maybe an artist's job is to help us figure out how to at least digest it in a way or get our arms around it. So it's a good question.
Go right ahead.
Sure. Okay, so I've read all your books, and I always go into the bookstore to see if you've written something new. And somehow I found out you wrote a book that I could only get ebook. So it's The Orchard, and I read it in like a day. And it is the most poetic, beautiful book. I mean, to me, it's a woman's book, and I thought maybe you changed, maybe it was an alias, because it just sounded like a woman wrote it, and it's a beautiful book, and that probably explains your crying men stories. But I just wonder what the poetry in it. Also, I understand after you explained your love of poetry, but where did that story come from? It's absolutely gorgeous.
So that story is first person from the point of view of a 8-year-old girl.
Right.
And that was the voice that when I sat down to write that's the voice that came. And I was like, okay, wait, you're an 8-year-old girl, and you're speaking, I did this. You're speaking in the first person. Come on, let's go. I was like so excited to try something totally different, and it was really freeing. The girl is so smart, and she has such a great sense of fun, and she's funny and quirky, and I just loved being her for a few months. It was just a gas.
All the women in that book were just
and
great women to know.
That makes me think. That makes me think about the magic of fiction. I can't explain it. It's just so magical, and it is so. It's like paranormal, and it's awesome. I'm glad you liked the book. Thank you.
I have a question, Peter. You prompted this. What would you say to people who said you don't have the right or the ability to write in the voice of an 8-year-old girl, which seems to be, a situation that some writers are running into?
You don't have the right to do that?
Yeah. Or the ability, or
I don't know. Listen, Barbara Kingsolver just wrote an amazing book, right? Demon Copperhead. It starts out, with this kid, in first person. It's like brilliant. If she can do it, why can't I do it?
Yeah. There's your answer. Yeah. Go right ahead. Yes.
You kind of answered it just a little bit there, but I was just interested in what you like to read. What are you reading? What do you like to read? What are you reading?
Oh, right. I'm like really eclectic. I read all sorts of stuff. I'm reading that novel Trust right now. won the Pulitzer Prize, and I'm probably going to put it down. I'm halfway through. A lot of times I'll read books halfway through because there's so many books I want to read, and it's interesting, and I'm reading it as a craft person. Like, okay, I get what you're doing. It's incredible, it's wonderful, but I don't really care what happens. So let's go on to the next. So that's what I do. But, I love James McBride. I'll read anything Murakami writes. I love Paulette Giles. She was a poet first, News of the World. It's just all over the map. And I read poetry too. Yep.
Okay, another live stream question. There are a lot of books called Burn. Were you concerned about this? And can you talk about surfing at the Olympics this summer?
No and no. I don't. I'm not worried about other titles of the people will find the book. And surfing at the Olympics was so awesome. They finally because Tokyo was a crappy beach break. It was terrible. This is a real wave. We loved it. Kim and I were glued, and we'd watch the replays at night. I just loved it. That's a great wave. And we were there for a magazine assignment 2 years ago, so that was kind of cool. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Fellow Front Ranger, last saw you at the Boulder bookstore. My question is about your connection to Traverse City. I've read that you spent time here when you were working on the Dog Stars and were inspired by the area, which is interesting because you set the novel back in Boulder. So could you just speak to your connection to Traverse City and how long you've been coming here?
I think I came to Traverse City the first time after I wrote the Dog Stars. So, but we were here for the river, was it, or
the river in
Celine?
2018? Yeah.
Okay, Celine maybe first.
In 20.
Okay, but as soon as I came, I can just say, look, you guys. This is my favorite venue. It's not just because it's in the Opera House. It's because you guys are so warm. And you have a sense of humor. That's a killer combo, by the way. Keep it up. Yeah, I've been here now. This is the third time, and I just love it.
We have time for one more, and then thank you.
Do I get it?
Yes, and then we'll go to this gentleman right here.
Oh, okay.
Two more.
Hi, Peter. Jeannie Whitty from Dartmouth class of 82. So my question is, thinking about the time we spent in Hanover and on the Connecticut River, and I remember you were a big kayaker. How did that experience impact your creative juices and where you are today?
I just think having a connection to the outdoors is really important. It's not the outdoors; it's nature, and I'm finding I live in Denver now. I live on a lake, but I think that I can find that connection in the evening on this urban lake because there's cormorants, there's even pelicans sometimes, there's all sorts of ducks, there's peregrines, there's accipiters like Cooper's hawks hunting, there's osprey, there's fish, carp jumping, and there's smells, there's willows, there's redwings in the willows. It's and there's mountains. They sort of give you that make you feel small, and it's I think we can, if we pay attention, we can find that connection anywhere. But I think being at a place that where I learned to kayak and stuff, that was just a way to get in. It's a way to navigate wild country, and it was very, very valuable. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Last question right here, sir. Go ahead.
Not nearly such a literary question, but. When you survived at St. Paul, did you go and get a hip replacement? And did you actually kayak the entire Crystal from Redstone to Carbondale?
Mm-hmm. No. I didn't do Meat Grinder. I've never done Meat Grinder. That's that terrible, gnarly section where my friend Henry died.
On the Crystal?
Yeah. So that's the one section I haven't done. No. No, I got a lot of books to write. A lot of ibuprofen to eat.
All right. Thank you, Peter Heller, so
Thank
much
you
for
so
being
much.
here.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Up next is best-selling author Jodi Picoult, featuring her new novel, By Any Other Name. The event is September 10th at 7 p.m. Get tickets at nationalwriterseries.org. Thank you.